All right, I think we'll get started. So first off, I want to just introduce myself quickly. My name is Andre, and I just want to thank you all so much for joining the conversation today. The conversation is titled Facing History and Ourselves, the Urgency of Understanding. And what I thought I'd start with before we get into the panel is just a little bit of background on myself, as well as just a little bit of a quick story around why this topic. This one is near and dear to my heart. Of all the topics that I've covered so far in these types of webinars or on one-on-ones with some business leaders, or doing racial equity solutions workshops with some folks across Wall Street mainly. This is the one that started it all for me, this topic. And so I'll give a little bit of background, and then we'll get into why this topic, and then we'll start the panel. So just a little bit of background on myself. I am 16 years into my career at Goldman Sachs. I am 6 years into my board membership, for which I've been as chairman of the board of the not-for-profit named Getting Out and Staying Out. I am the son of two absolutely amazing immigrants from Haiti, the brother of a brilliant gay Black man, the husband of the most special woman that I've ever met, who is white. She's the most special woman I've ever met, period, but she's also white. And I'm the father of a 2.5-year-old daughter. I'm 38 years old, and I am Black. That's the context that I bring to these conversations. The goal of this talk and any of the work that I've been doing, it's one, to bring nuance and vulnerability and historical context to conversations around racial equity. Those things are necessary for these conversations. That's the first thing. The second thing I hope with all of these conversations is not to just educate, but to inspire and incite direct action to achieve racial equity. I am not interested, myself personally, I'm not interested in having people join the eternal march toward the commercialized and convenient image of racial equity. I am very, very, very interested in getting people to seek to achieve racial equity. And you cannot do that without historical context. You cannot do that without nuance, and you cannot do that without vulnerability. And so that's what I'm trying to bring in these conversations. And I think today is really going to help us get there in a lot of ways. And so when I look at the people who have joined the conversation so far, as I mentioned earlier, a lot of people from Goldman Sachs, a lot of people from BlackRock, because my man Bjorn Haynes, who's introduced me to the folks at Facing History, that's where he's working right now, and a lot of educators. And so this is a good group of people who I think individually and collectively could do a lot of good towards achieving racial equity. Now, I want to give a little story about how we came to this topic. So June 1st, this is after international demonstrations for the purpose of drawing attention to matters of racial justice and racial equity after the murder of George Floyd. I saw a Facebook post that read, "What if the passion for burning cars and businesses was applied to being better fathers, mothers, brothers, and sisters, and generally more respectful of one another? What about that? By the way, selfishness always leads to destruction." When I read that, a lot of things went through my mind. First was, do you really think that people are burning down buildings and burning cars out of passion to do so? Is that what you believe? What have you read? What have you learned so far about these people who may have been burning things? What have you learned about them that makes you think they need to be better family members? Unfortunately, it was just someone falling back on common pathetic stereotypes and really damaging stereotypes and a really damaging narrative. But what really hit me between the eyes was it was just, I was thinking about it and I thought, holy shit, this is how it happens. There are well-intentioned, mostly white people, who will look back at this moment and say, do you remember when that bad apple police officer did that awful thing to that man? And then they lost their minds and burnt down their cities. That is how some people remember the single largest demonstration in humankind, is what I believe it was. Never asking the question, why are they so angry? Why are they demonstrating? Right? Like it became so clear to me in this situation, and as well as in most situations of inequality, when you look at a group of people, who, let's say a group of rich people and a group of poor people, you have no historical context, no understanding of who those people are. It is very easy to just simply look at that situation and say the people who are rich must have done all the right things and the people who are poor must have done all the wrong things. But when you happen to understand that the people who are in the latter category have been suffering as victims for as long as their ancestors have been in this country, it changes the way we look at things. And it made me think, where is the historical context? Where is the nuance? Where is the opportunity for people to understand where people are coming from? Because this racial equity it matters deeply to me, and I believe it matters deeply to most people on this webinar. But you're not going to understand it. We're not going to be able to achieve it unless people can look back and start to trace the history of why we are in the situation that we are in. And this conversation is about that. It is about the default setting of education being one of a narrative that glosses over so much context, so much nuance, that people can grow up to be my age and still have no idea how we got to where we are, and just still be thinking about how much people, how much the people who are demonstrating need to be the ones that are changing. It's too much, and it's got to change. And education is a big part of it. And so today we're going to be going through the education that people are typically getting. We're going to be going through what is missing and what the consequences of that is. And so we're going to be having a conversation with some brilliant folks, Pam Haas and Stephen Becton from Facing History and ourselves, a not-for-profit dedicated to this exact purpose. And I asked Sarah Marie Martin, Goldman Sachs investment banker, racial equity ally, and mother of 5 school-age children, 3 of whom are Black, to moderate this discussion. And I'll come in towards the end to review some calls to action based on this topic. But Sarah Marie, thank you so much for agreeing to join and participate in this. You have been a great friend and great ally for as long as I've known you, and I couldn't be more honored to have you participate in this conversation. And so let me just turn it to you. I would love to hear just or I'd love for you to just tell the audience a little bit about yourself and why you wanted to do this. You're on mute, by the way.
Thank you. Zoom challenges. Reg, that was beautiful. Thank you for your testimony, and thank you for inviting me to this session. As Reg mentioned, by day, I'm a partner at Goldman Sachs in the investment banking division. I'm also the mother of 5 children. 3 of my children were adopted. 2 of my children are biological. They range in age from 23 to 6 years old. Of my adopted children, 2 are originally from Ethiopia, and 1 was born in Indiana. All 3 of my adopted children are Black. I love our country. My father is an American historian. He retired recently after 50 years of teaching. His last year, he taught at West Point on a very prestigious assignment. And actually just today, in honor of this session, he sent me 2 of his books that he signed for me, 2 of his recent publications. And he's amazing. As a child, we drove around the country visiting historical sites. And I'm sure you can imagine that nothing speaks fun to a kid like a Revolutionary War battlefield. You know, as evidence of my love for our country and our really amazing history, my dog is named Washington. However, my 14-year-old black son asked me, Mom, how could we name the dog Washington? How could George Washington be a good man when he enslaved people? And similar to what Reg was saying, I always accepted history as it was told to me. You know, to me, George Washington was first in war, first in peace, and first in hearts of his countrymen. He was the ultimate hero and the ultimate patriot, you know, the ultimate good person. But how do you define a person who did so many good things, yet enslaved people? And how do I explain that to my black teenager? How do we teach our children to be good people when the role models are so complicated? And I already named my dog, so what do I do about that? You know, fast forward to the current era, personally, I've been monumentally moved and motivated by the death of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, and too many other people. I am an ally. Reg, thank you for saying that. I want to be uncomfortable. I want to do more to support my children. I want to do more to support people of color. If 2020 has taught me anything, it's to speak up and it's to keep challenging my own assumptions. I'd like to urge everyone on the call or on the replay to listen to the 1619 podcast. It was very insightful and eye-opening for me. I learned a lot. It was hard to learn, but I'm glad I did.
We confront history beyond just facts and figures. We empower teachers to ask tough questions and engage students in finding the answers. We equip schools with resources from the past and the tools to face the present. We examine the role of bystanders and upstanders then and now. Facing History is 60,000 teachers and more than 5 million students, standing up against hatred, racism, anti-Semitism, bigotry, and bullying. There are many classes that teach science, math, and English. There is only one that teaches us to be more human. People make choices. Choices make history. Join us.
Welcome Pam Haas, Executive Director of the New York office, and Steve Becton, Chief Equity Officer of Facing History. Pam and Stephen, could you introduce yourselves and tell us a little about the work you do and why? Starting with Pam.
Sure, thank you, Reg, and thank you, Sarah Marie, for inviting us to this important conversation tonight. And so I began my career as a middle school teacher in New York City at an independent school in Morningside Heights. After getting my master's in education in Boston, I ran a program called Breakthrough Cambridge, which worked with both students and teachers in getting access to excellent education for under-resourced children. And I knew that I've always loved helping adolescents find their place in the world, making a difference and helping teachers as well. I personally have a passion for history as well, and also a passion for talking about difficult issues about race and prejudice, anti-Semitism. My father-in-law is a Holocaust survivor, and I heard about this organization called Facing History. So I came back to New York, and I've been at Facing History for 22 years. I've been the executive director for the last 3 and helped to grow the office. I'm also a parent to 2 teenagers, a 16 and an 18-year-old. And Facing History has really helped me tremendously with being a better parent.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much for joining us. First of all, you could have been many places, so thank you for joining this very important conversation. Thanks, Reginald. I was so inspired by your opening comments and was just nodding my head as I agree with so many of your reflections and can relate. And Sarah Marie, your story and your father's legacy that would live through you and your children. That's an amazing story. Thank you. And I would love to have some of your father's books. If you're wondering about my accent, I'm talking to you from Memphis, Tennessee. So I grew up here in Memphis. Relevant to this conversation, I grew up in a single parent home on the south side of Memphis, and in a relative low socioeconomic community, but an amazingly strong mother and some amazingly strong educators to help me stay on track and sort of find my way through a difficult world. But I always start there because that's not the story of all of my classmates and neighbors and young Black men from the neighborhood that I was from. You know, in this whole conversation we having about racial justice, some people will point to Steve Becton and go, see, he went to college and he has a master's degree and he'll have a PhD in May and he's doing all these things and he's from the inner city. Why can't you? And the question shouldn't be why can't more young Black men from my neighborhood do what I've been fortunate to do. The question is, why is it so hard for this to happen? The question is, why should I be an exception or seen as exceptional and not the norm? And that the answer to that question doesn't lie in the poor choices of young Black men, although young Black men need to make good choices. But guess what? They don't make any worse choices than any teenagers. Teenagers make bad choices. Sometimes they're teenagers. But the larger point is, why do their choices lead to a different set of circumstances, outcomes, and pitfalls? So these are the questions that we try to grapple with in our work. And as Reginald so clearly said, to put these things in historical context. So I've been working in Facing History since 9/11. So I'll never forget my work when I started here. September 11, 2001, I was a workshop in our Brookline office, learning how to start my career Facing History when the towers came down. And that would forever mark my beginning here. And I've been here since then, working hard on our work around racial justice and equity, and I'm just excited about this conversation and look forward to leaning into it. Thank you.
We have two very tenured people on the panel. Terrific. Thank you for the introduction. Pam, can you describe in your own words Facing History and Ourselves' mission and work?
Sure. So Facing History and Ourselves uses the lessons of history to help teachers and their students stand up to bigotry and hate. So in service of this mission, we do three things. First, we train teachers. We work with middle and high school humanities teachers, history and English teachers, and offer them professional development, curriculum, and coaching. Currently, we have over 125,000 educators in our global network who use Facing History's curriculum and teaching methods. And those teachers reach over 12 million students in about 16,000 schools annually. The video you couldn't hear the audio, but we've actually doubled in size since the video was made 3 years ago. We deliver our work out of 7 US offices, 2 international offices in Toronto and London, and partnerships abroad from South Africa to Northern Ireland to China, and obviously all online and digital, as well as we have been for a while, and now we are completely online since March. Our teachers come from all 50 states and over 200 countries and provinces. Second, we write curriculum and we help put it into practice. So our work isn't just about what to teach, but how to teach it. At Facing History, we don't just write curriculum, but we help the teachers put it into practice. So our work doesn't end after our trainings do. We stay with teachers for their entire careers. We guest teach in their classrooms, we review their curriculum, and we partner with them as they face these new challenges. We help them create the safe and brave spaces for these very complex and difficult conversations. Our curriculum looks at very difficult moments in history, moments of mass violence and genocide. In addition, we have lessons on current events. Every 2 weeks, sometimes even more frequently, we write a new lesson on current events like voter suppression, the murder of George Floyd, standing up to coronavirus and anti-Asian sentiment, and promoting civil discourse in your classroom. And third, we work with schools. We work in public, independent, religious, and charter schools, serving middle and high school students from low-income neighborhoods and those with great resources. We engage students in a deep examination of racism, prejudice, and anti-Semitism, and we help them confront moral choices in their own lives so that they become what we say upstanders and not bystanders, allies and not bullies.
Pam, which topics facing history typically integrates into a partner school curriculum and why?
Sure. So as I mentioned, we look at very difficult moments in history, moments of mass violence and genocide, and really looking at when neighbor turned against neighbor. We examine the choices that everyday people made during these times and really get young people to connect with these choices and then apply it to their lives today. That's why we say teaching history and ourselves. Our approach is not only to teach the dates, the facts, and the leaders, those are included, but also to look at the choices of everyday people, an examination of human behavior. And you heard our tagline in the film, people make choices, choices make history. We have the secret sauce, which is what makes some of the magic happen in the classroom. We use a case study approach that begins with issues of identity and membership, leads into a historical case study, and then looks at how communities come together after mass violence. And then finally, and our goal is participation, getting young people to say, okay, now that I've learned this part of history, what's my role? How can I make a difference? And they very much feel empowered to do so. So the trainings in the curriculum that we look at, the moments in history, include in US history, the Reconstruction era, eugenics, the Civil Rights Movement, and particularly we look at Little Rock Central High School in Arkansas, as well as immigration. In world history, we look at World War II and the Holocaust, Japanese internment, Nanjing massacre, and the Armenian genocide. And then we also work with literature and English teachers, and we use memoir such as Night, other classic novels like To Kill a Mockingbird to bring the English teachers into our work as well. And then lastly, current events. Current events that fall under broad umbrellas about democracy and voting, civics, migration and immigration, and confronting modern day racism and anti-Semitism. I think the most important piece that I always like to say is that our approach is really to help young people not just look at the past, but also make connections to themselves and to today. And so often we drop the last part of our title, but it is facing history and ourselves.
Steve, Pam mentioned the difference between an upstander and a bystander. What is meant by that? What's the difference?
Yeah, great question. It's one of the sort of centerpieces of a conversation to have with young people about what we call historical actors. So bystanders are very pivotal when things are happening in young people's world and even in our world. Most people would identify themselves as bystanders, right? Like they're not perpetrators. They might not be actually doing anything to anybody, right? And they might not even be targets or victims, but they're bystanders. Bystanders are there. They're witnesses. They are indifferent. They're not engaged. But we help teachers, young people to see that actually the bystander, the choice of the bystander is very important because the indifference is engagement. There's a scholar by the name of David Gushee who said that from a moral point of view, if one is present, they're taking part. So there's really no such thing as a bystander. So if you look at moments in history, for example, in Nazi Germany, a very small percentage of Germans ever joined the Nazi party, right? Less than 3%. So what were the other Germans doing? Many were bystanders that allowed these things to happen by not getting involved. So we try to encourage our students to be upstanders, really a term that we first heard through Samantha Power. And that term upstander means in the face of injustice to do something. It might not be something huge. It could be something small, but to do something in the face of injustice and not be a bystander.
Steve, I'm guessing that most of us who are listening in today were not taught by a facing history or enlightened curriculum. How do you think that this has affected our current day society?
Excellent question. I think what has happened, you see the simple answers to complex questions, right? The complex issues that our society face right now. We are coming up with very simple answers that continue to polarize us. You know, how to figure out how to deal with racial injustice in policing, or how to figure out how to deal with the polarization that we see around elections, even the polarization around COVID. All of these things are very complex, but because we haven't learned to put these things in a historical context, we continue to come up with simple answers. For example, if one is to understand the notion of the criminalization of Black male identity, right? The idea that there's a bias that suggests that Black males are dangerous, that bias has a historical resonance. It's not about good and bad people today. It's not about white people being racist and not liking Black men. That is a result of a historical narrative that has started in, you know, early on in the roots of our country, this depiction of Black men as dangerous. And until we interrogate that narrative, see the historical roots of it, this is what Facing History is trying to do. Then we can together sort of unpack that and challenge that myth. And again, not in this sort of polarizing, divided way, but how do we come together to imagine and to think about a different narrative that humanizes Black men and understand their journey in American history. So this is what this has led to, this sort of simplistic approach to the challenges we face.
Thank you. With racial inequality and tensions present in so many aspects of our lives, can you tell us what it's like in schools right now? And what is Facing History and ourselves doing for students?
So students, what is it like for young people? Young people, by and large, those of y'all who are on the phone are parents, you can attest to this. Young people, by and large, they want to get along. They, you know, they want to be friends regardless of race and all religion and all those kinds of things. They really do want to get along. They care more about like who's going out with each other than their skin color. They care more about being present and popular and being invited and being included. But what's happening in schools is that because schools are a microcosm of society, unfortunately, these young people are having to make choices because of what's happening in the media, what's happening with their parents and adults. Because of this tension that's happening with adults, unfortunately, young people are for the first time are being forced to say, like, what side of this divide am I on? I have a 21-year-old daughter who unfortunately has lost friends in this moment. Because they're having to take sides, like this place we're in now, and this is what's happening in schools and among young people. But also on the flip side of that, young people are more engaged than ever too. They're more active. They paying a great attention. They're fighting for justice. They're standing up for what they believe in. So there's more sort of civic engagement too. So that's a great thing. So in a Facing History's context, what we're doing is we don't indoctrinate kids in this moment that we're in. We don't even tell them what to think. We don't tell them what to believe. We equip teachers to give students the tools to be critical thinkers for themselves, right? To see things from multiple perspectives, to make up their minds about what's freedom and equitable and just. Even to the point where students in a very respectful way can go home and say, Mom, Dad, you know, I'm thinking about this in a different way. So can we talk about this at the dinner table? So students are the founder of Facing History. She would say that young people are moral philosophers, right? They want to grapple with right and wrong and justice. And that's what we're trying to do in Facing History, to help them do that.
So do you think that the students that have benefited from your curriculum and approach are processing what's going on today differently than those who haven't?
Yeah, I honestly do, and that they come to what's happening in the world today with a different perspective, right? They understand again historical context, how important that is, but also they understand a couple of more things. Not to dehumanize other people that are different from them. This idea right now that how we dehumanize folks that don't agree with us is very troubling, and facing history really help young people to not to do that, to try to walk in other people's shoes, even if it hurts a little bit, to see things from another perspective. So because they show up in a conversation that way, they are more likely to be active listeners. They are more likely to engage in civil dialogue rather than debate. They more likely want to come up with better answers, and not all better questions even, and not always simple and quick answers. So these are the tools that we're giving kids, students, and we do it in a way. I just want to be transparent because I know there's parents listening. You don't have to indoctrinate kids to do that. Facing history is it's apolitical. We don't sort of tell kids what sides of political issues to take, but what we do is we trust kids to look at things in the complexity of it all, and we trust them to make good choices about how they're going to treat they fellow humans.
If I could just say, today I was talking to a Facing History alum, actually from Memphis, Steve. She's now 22 years old. And I asked her, how did Facing History help you? She's a young African-American woman. And she was talking to me that she really felt like she got the toolbox that she needs to have conversations with all different kinds of people. And she mentioned her best friend. She said just in the last her came from a more conservative family, was her family she was a Trump supporter at that point, and she said, I did, because of Facing History, I didn't dismiss this my friend. We engaged in deeper conversations. And she said even now she's in the workplace, she's also doing a master's, that she feels really comfortable speaking with white people. She's a Black young woman, having these conversations, and people say, wow, you're so approachable, you listen so well. Those are tools that she got in her Facing History classroom. So, that just happened this afternoon, and I was like, I have to share this with the group tonight, because I just thought that was really what we hope and what we want to see.
Pam, adding on to the alumni feedback, what do you hear from parents and teachers who participate?
So, well, the teachers teachers basically often say to us, this is why I went into teaching. We've helped to reinvigorate their mission in becoming a teacher. We know that teachers feel more efficacious, they can be more effective in the work because of the tools Facing History gives them. It also promotes a more inclusive classroom. They get the tools and the strategies to make kids feel ready to talk and participate and be more engaged. And parents often come home, tell us, wow, my kid's coming home and actually talking at the dinner table about what they're learning in school. So they're having really, much more engaging conversations. And I remember one of our students told a story about her, she was studying the Holocaust in one of her classes. This is in high school. And she's from the Dominican Republic, and came home to talk to her aunt and her mom about the dictator Trujillo during World War II and what he had done to take in Jews. And her aunt's face just went white. And it turned out there was like a family connection to this period of time, but the family just had this really rich conversation. So we hear that all the time from parents, that my kids are really bringing home, they're excited to learn, and they're pressing me, with some hard questions that sometimes we don't always know how to answer as parents.
Do the parents ever respond negatively to learning things a different way, or learning things in a different way than they were taught?
I think that, also teachers often, before they start their Facing History units, they tend to communicate with the parents, and we encourage them to do this, whether it's usually writing a letter or an email to say, hey, I'm going to be going into this unit, and it may be some very sensitive subjects and topics, and often the teachers will sort of open the door to the parents to be in dialogue and in conversation about what's happening. We'll hear often, not often, but we'll hear from maybe a teacher or a superintendent that parents may have, questioning a little bit about the material, or not so much the material, but because once they see the material, they really say, oh, okay, this is a nonpartisan organization, but they may jump to a conclusion about what direction or what side this is leaning on. I would say that's just been more recently because of the partisan nature of our world right now. I don't know if Steve has another example.
Yeah, and it happens a little bit, again, especially down here. I could speak particularly to down here in the South. It happens a little bit. Again, when parents are worried that, students are being sort of, indoctrinated to think a certain way. But as Pam said, we open the doors and parents come in and they do a classroom lesson, and what they find out is that actually we're doing the exact opposite. We're helping kids to really find their own voice and to think critically and those type of things. And parents go, wow, those are great skills for students. So we love winning over skeptical parents. Actually, it's a good process.
We have a related question. As part of your methodology, do you call out academic sources of disinformation? And have you faced opposition to your mission from specific segments of society? And if so, how have you dealt with it?
I'll talk to the disinformation piece, and I'll demonstrate a little bit this later in a quick little, show you a little bit of our way in which we approach teaching and learning. But what we try to do is really ground our work in real scholarship, right? The deepest, most respected scholarship. Eric Foner, the foremost scholar around Reconstruction, he helped us to produce our Reconstruction unit. So what we try to do is that, number one, is to highlight our work in the most rigorous way through great scholars and great scholarship, primary source documents, so that, again, so students can be trusted with history and just the facts of history in the most rigorous way. But also, we try to give students multiple perspectives on how certain people have written about history and how they see an event, so that, again, that students can see the range of responses out there.
I think that in addition, we've had a curriculum, we wrote a curriculum called Facing Ferguson a few years ago, which really looked at developing media literacy skills for young people, looking very specifically at how the Ferguson story broke, et cetera. Mm-hmm. And, students and young people are getting a lot of information from a lot of different sources. Obviously, social media is a huge piece. So we work with teachers and we have a lot of tools and we have some curriculum materials to help them teach their students how to disaggregate the information that's coming their way.
And just to be frank, because we always want to be honest and authentic about this conversation, there are people out there who don't want young people thinking critically, right? They just don't. They don't want them to think critically. They don't want young people to see things from multiple perspectives. They want young people to think in one way, in the way that they want them to think. And so we have some of that that we try to navigate. But first and foremost, we're an education organization. That's just that. I just want to surface that. So at the end of the day, what we are about is good curriculum, good teaching, good learning, high levels of student engagement. So educators of all sort of ideologies, political persuasions, all kinds of classrooms, from public to private to parochial, embrace facing history, because at the end of the day, what we're invested in is quality education that helps students be the best version of themselves that they can be, and prepare them for college and to be productive citizens. And most parents want that, right?
You're on mute.
Sorry. Steve, why do you think that the Facing History curriculum approach isn't the default way that schools teach?
Oh, how I wish it was the default. That's a great and complicated question. I think it's largely because teachers teach the way they were taught, right? And curriculum is written, textbooks and standard curriculum is written from this ideology that, frankly, that almost like students can't be trusted, right, with the nuances of history. Like you have to get them these simple ideas about our heroes and about our founding fathers and about periods in history. Like it's almost as if the textbooks writers think students can't be trusted with nuance. And so the inability to trust students with nuance is one piece. And secondly, textbooks trying their best to be sort of just fact driven and neutral. Students don't learn that way though. Think about if you ever liked your history class, it wasn't just because of the facts and date. I bet you that teacher made you think and made you reflect and made you wonder. So it's not the default because simplicity is the default, right? And trying to get people and not trusting students with the nuances is the default.
It's also, I mean, I would also just add, you know, this is really hard stuff to talk about, right? To talk about issues of race, prejudice, anti-Semitism. Many teachers, you know, would prefer to take a little bit of a safer route. And so I think often, you know, the teachers that come to us, they're self-selected, but as we're becoming more and more present in districts, teachers are coming, you know, or being mandated to come or mandated to be trained. I think that, you know, we also know we can outfit them. We can give them the tools they need to have those conversations. And a lot of our current events materials are quite prescriptive in helping teachers, kind of holding their hand and how to set up the classroom, the kind of questions to ask, et cetera, contracting, a lot of methods so that they can have these conversations because they know they have to, right? The students are seeing this on social media. It's coming in minutes before they walk into that classroom, and teachers can no longer really hide from teaching some of these issues.
I'm going to ask one more question, and then we're going to go to Steve for a lesson, and then we'll come back to some Q&A. So the final question for now is to Pam. How do you find your partner schools and ultimately integrate with the partner schools?
Sure. So, you know, for over 40 years, I mean, we really grew grassroots. So teachers came to us individually. They found us, they learned about us word of mouth from another teacher. Or, you know, more recently, or I would say over the last like 10 years or so, really principals and districts have approached us, and we've been able to grow and start to scale in significant ways, particularly in Memphis, in Chicago, Boston, even here in New York, but also even our suburban systems locally here, you know, Chappaqua, Harrison, Pelham, Mamaroneck, as well as in New Jersey, Long Island. So they're starting to, they come to us and really work whole system, whole school. But when a school or district wants to get on board, we usually start with a team of teachers to come to a summer, or now we do them year-round training to get an intensive training. They also can attend year-round workshops, and then we'll introduce it to a larger cohort in the school. But what I said earlier is one of our unique pieces is that we stay with teachers really for their whole teaching career and their whole journey. So we will coach them, we do follow-up with them. Once they become part of our network, they're invited to all of our programs. They get the updated curricular materials, can come to more professional development and offerings. And we really can also work with them and help them build programs in their own schools, ideally across social studies and English, and even into the advisory. So what we love to see, a partner school is a school that teaches facing history in 9th, 10th, 11th, and 12th grade, but also in social studies and in English. And it really starts to affect the whole school, the school's values, the culture of the school. It's an inclusive culture and a culture of standing up against hate and bigotry. I remember, I think I told this story to Reg or recently to a colleague that at my son's high school, the football coach, he was just starting football as a 10th grader, introduced us to a back to school night. And I was very nervous about him doing football. And then the coach said, well, listen, my goal is to make these young men upstanders and citizens. As soon as he said upstanders, I was bought in. So, and it is a partner school. So I think, like, you know, those schools that really see how this kind of thinking it's really citizenship, right? It's about being part of a community. That's where we see the both the social, emotional, and the academic coming together.
That's good.
Terrific. What a great story. Steve, we're going to turn it over to you for a few minutes to go through an example lesson.
Yeah, just want to do this relative quick, but just to give you a sense of what Pam and I have been describing. One of the key units that we teach in high schools is reconstruction, and the history folks on the phone. You know how pivotal this moment was, right? The moment right after the Civil War was fought in our country, and there was this period of reconstruction. What kind of nation would we be? How would we heal? How would we come together? What kind of nation would we be in this post-Civil War, post-slavery democracy? And the truth is that interracial democracy in this country was actually working for a moment, and it can work, and it was working in during some of this moment of reconstruction. Next slide, please. So here's one of the questions, some of the questions that we raise in a facing history classroom around reconstruction is that how does our experience and memory of the past impact our choices and beliefs today, right? So this idea that history speaks to today, we raise this in any unit. Reconstruction is considered contested history. Why is that? So why in these pivotal moments in history are these histories sometimes contested, and how do we help students unpack when histories are contested, right? And I'll tell you what I mean by contested history. And why has democracy been called a work in progress, right? That we want students to know that to not lose their sense of that we're always working toward this ideal of democracy. Next slide. So the period of Reconstruction, I sort of described it already, is less known and less under. It's a very, in some places, poorly taught or rarely taught history. To be so pivotal is so interesting. But when it is taught, what's interesting is that when it is taught, it's generally misguided, is rooted in misconceptions, and it's some of the out-of-date historical interpretation of the period. That's from Eric Foner. Next slide. So out of Reconstruction came this very troubling idea called the Dunning School of Thought. So remember who was writing the history, right? The victors get to write the history, or those in the dominant culture gets to write history often. So out of Reconstruction came this idea that these radical Republicans from the North were being vindictive, motivated by hatred of the South, right? And that they were going to overturn that Lincoln and Johnson was trying to bring the South back into the Union in a very lenient way, but these radical Northern Republicans would work against that. And they would be imposing Black suffrage, imposing things on the Confederacy, right? Punishing the Confederacy. And these Northerners that they call carpetbaggers, where they were taking advantage of this situation. So this was called a Dunning School of Thought. It was a popular reframe that was going around Reconstruction. Next slide. And these things too, that the Southern whites, they abandoned their race, right, and their loyalty by joining up with these radical Republicans and former slaves. And I put this in red because it's very important. This narrative that slaves did not want, neither were they prepared for freedom. This was a popular refrain. Gone with the Wind, right? The popular film that we all know that has lasted throughout centuries. It kind of depicted this, the happy, joyous slave who didn't want to leave the plantation and would run in a fight for their plantation life. This is the story of Reconstruction. And Klan were viewed as patriots. They were trying to overthrow this bad government and restore white supremacy in our country. Next slide. So the Dunning School of Thought was powerful, but there were ideas pressing against this. And this is an amazing piece from an artist called Thomas Nast, where this woman known as Columbia, she sort of represented the country. And the question here was, should I trust these men? These men at Columbia's feet were former Confederate soldiers and leaders and politicians that are asking forgiveness of the country. So Columbia is going, should I pardon these men and not franchise this man? And this man, this black soldier that fought for the Union, who was wounded and fought for the Union, right? So should I give him the franchise, the vote, citizenship, and pardon these men? So if I should pardon these men, I should embrace these men. That was another refrain. Next slide. And then there was this other sort of propaganda, right? That black men, these black politicians that you see on the left side, that's a cartoon depiction of the South Carolina legislature, of this chaos, of these black men in chaos that are not fit for leadership. And on the right side, you see this sort of a black man and soldier depicting this violence, the carnage of the Klan on the ground, as if he's defeated white supremacy, and this is the change he wants for this country. So there was this sort of propaganda engine going on that set up this idea that we should stop this notion of black freedom and really gain some recontrol, which gave way to the Klan and racial terror and violence in our country. Next slide. But this is a depiction of what really was going on. This is an amazing 2-3 years after slavery. You had black men in this being as distinguished in the Senate and the Congress as men of the day were supposed to be, right? That they depicted the intellect and the gentleman piece of being a congressman. So black men were showing up. These are former slaves showing up in these spaces because they were always ready for freedom and to be a part of the democracy. Next slide. You know this film, The Birth of a Nation. So The Birth of a Nation was a propaganda film that was, again, that depicted this idea of black violence, danger of letting black people vote, danger of letting black men lead. And I just wanted to surface that film as again, one of those narratives of history that just wasn't true. And then the next slide, I think it's the last one. So these misconceptions, the reason I want to show you this is that these misconceptions, when are unchallenged, I want you to hear that there's legacies of history. So if that's the way students learn about Reconstruction, and most of us learned about Reconstruction, those legacies last today. These stereotypes and depictions of black men last today. The idea that interracial democracy can happen, those ideas last today. And I would give W.V. Du Bois the last word, where he says, Reconstruction governments were successful for their time. They were clean, they were progressive. And as W.B. Du Bois said back in the 1930s, well, white Southerners fear far more than black failure was black success. Reconstruction governments were successful, and that's why they had to be taken down. So immediately after Reconstruction, if you study American history, again, that became the rise of lynching, racial terror, voter suppression, anything to maintain white supremacy in the country. So this is one way that we lay out this historical narrative for students and let them grapple with the complexity of this, and they do it in a way that's really thoughtful and connected to today. I'm going to stop there because I want to make sure we have time for some questions and dialogue.
Thanks, Stephen. Taking me a second to really recover from some of that.
Yeah.
But I think that's a perfect way to segue into what we ought to be doing with this information. What should we be doing right now, right? I think that everyone on this webinar hopefully sees that right now the default setting for education is one that does not necessarily equip our students, our children, to grow up as upstanders.
Mm-hmm.
My view in this, and you know, we've all spoken about this quite a bit, those of us on the panel, is that it's putting our children in a position where they're going to need to go through the same difficult, jarring, unlearning process before they can become upstanders that we're all going, that many of us have to go through, myself included. I was one of the only Black students in an all-white school district. I had immigrant parents who didn't understand necessarily the nuance of American racism and the history of it. And so I learned from the same textbooks, and it's taken me a long time to really unlearn a lot of those narratives. But what can we all do? What is the call to action here? I feel really strongly about this, and I'm like holding myself back from just crying or yelling, because this stuff it's everything. I do not want my daughter to have to go through the same kind of things that I'm going through right now and that I've gone through growing up and getting to this point. I don't want her to have to be joining these conversations.
Yeah.
And so here's what we can all do to make that. No, go ahead, Stephen, please.
I'm sorry, before you move to that call to action, let me say something that I think people really need to hear that I don't want to miss. So what we do when we teach these histories is not to leave students feeling like cynical and like how bad our country is. That's not our point, or how bad our founding fathers were, George Washington, Thomas Jefferson, these people. So what we want them to see is the complexity of the struggle for freedom and democracy, right? Thomas Jefferson owned slaves, right? Who is he? He owned slaves, but he also wrote all men are created equal. And that document, that idea is a great idea for us to continue to fight for. So what's true about him? Both things are true, right? Both things are true. Yes, he made this terrible choice to enslave and own slaves, but he also stood up for this idea of freedom and democracy. Same with George Washington, right? Both things are true. And so I think these men are an example of what's also true for our country. We are a country that does believe in freedom and democracy, but at the same time, we have systemic racism going on. We have injustice around pay equity and things of this nature with women. So we have these injustices right in the face of these ideas of freedom and democracy. And I call them the Great American Paradox. And what we want our kids to imagine is the idea of freedom and justice will win out over this idea of oppression and subjugating of people. So thank you, Reggie. Preach.
All right, so listen, what can we all do as citizens, as parents? What can we do? Now let's assume that no one has thought about this. Everyone just learned this all of this for the first time. What can we do about it? Is first, get educated on your child's education. Do not burden them with the baggage to learn to let go later on. Let's try to have them educated correctly the first time. And so what that means is ask your school's teachers like how they are teaching history. Get a sense of it. Does it sound like anything you just heard today? If it doesn't, I mean, that leads to the second thing. I mean, advocate, talk to other parents, talk to Facing History. There's a ton of resources on their website. There's a ton of ways to get your schools, your children's schools involved and kind of work in partnering with Facing History. And so to me, there's no way that Autumn, my daughter, is going to go to a school that is not going to teach her this way. And I hope that other people feel similarly and will act on it. I think it would be interesting to hear why a school would not want to do this. And I hope that everyone can get comfortable with that answer. And I don't think that you can. The second thing I'd say is look, Facing History has never been in more demand. Support them, donate. They are doing this. They are a not-for-profit, filling in the gaps of the default education system. And it is incredible work that they're doing. As you can tell, extremely important. But I can't even, once I learned about this organization, I'm like, why does this even have to exist? But we know that it does. But the work that they do is critical and it's costly. They have to spend a lot of time on this. And so donate, support. join their gala that's coming up on December 2nd, the virtual benefit. That's going to have the Pulitzer Prize winning Isabel Wilkerson, who just wrote the book Caste, The Origins of Our Discontent, which I think needs to be the required reading for everybody. It is such an incredible book, and it offers such a great rubric for how to consider matters of history, how to consider matters of race. And she would say that we should be considering matters of caste. And I think the book itself makes the case for people to recognize the American way as a caste system similar to that of India's and similar to that of Nazi Germany. And so I would suggest that people read that book, but more importantly for the purposes of this conversation, go to the gala. Just go to the gala, listen to what they have to say, donate enthusiastically, and invite your friends to do the same thing. And then also educate yourself. There are a ton of free online tools and resources on the Facing History website that you can go to, and they're kind of bite-sized, and you can go through them pretty quickly. But there's no reason for you not to be educated on these things in more detail, because you want your children to have this education. And if the teachers aren't going to give it to them, they need to get it somewhere. And so I think going to the website and getting these resources is going to be incredibly important and helpful for, the Facing History mantra, people make choices, choices make history. It is like our children are going to have their turn to make history. Let's equip them with the tools that they need to think critically and to crave nuance, to crave context. Before judging and before making decisions that are going to impact people. And with that, I think we want to open it up to questions from the audience. And Sam Marie, I'm going to let you drive. We have a bunch of questions, and we're going to go. We're happy to go a little later than 6:45 if people have additional questions. And so we will. We can take it, Sarah, whichever question you want to start with.
Okay, I'm going to start with one, same initials as me, from SM. I recently learned about the G.I. Joe fallacy, which calls into question the age-old notion that knowing is half of the battle. The fallacy is that knowing doesn't do anything. In order to change behavior, we have to change habits. What habits can we as parents and educators start to change in young children to help prepare them for the kind of critical thinking and deeper understanding that is introduced in your curriculum?
Yeah, great question. We agree that knowing is not enough. Knowing is good, but knowing is not enough. People knew things, and then people knew the Holocaust was happening, and the world didn't respond. So knowing is not enough. So what does it mean to know? Something to think about. But this habits piece, parents should model. Should model, not when something has happened, right? Not when a George Floyd has happened, or not with not when something is how do you just in the everyday engagement with young people model critical thinking, model multiple perspective? How do you show up as a parent in conversations with your kids to model this kind of behavior so that kids could build the tools? Because that's what we're doing in classroom. Teachers, Facing History teachers aren't responding to current events always. It's every day. They're raising these kinds of questions with students every day so that students could exercise that muscle of being critical thinkers, of being reflective, of going, okay, my response to this needs to be to slow it down and to think about it from different perspectives, to think about it historically, and to ask myself what's really going on here, right? And what's at stake here. So how do you practice that with your kids when there's not a crisis, right? Pam, anything you would add?
Yeah, I would just add, having been a parent, particularly of teenagers, now they're teenagers, but one of the things that modeling is my answer. So your kids are looking at you all the time. So when you're walking down the street, and there's a person that's visually impaired and they're trying to cross the street, their kids are watching you. Are you going to stop? Are you going to help them in slowing down? But one thing we did in our family is we implemented, family dinners, whether it's Sunday night, Friday night, or whatnot. We asked a question of our kids, and we've been asking it really for 10 years probably, how are you a 1 this week? And the idea of a 1 comes from a children's book by Catherine Atoshi called 1. It's a beautiful book about being an upstander. And so each of us would go around the dinner table and talk about how we were a 1 that week. And sometimes we weren't. Sometimes we didn't help anyone. So the idea was, oh, I helped someone down the stairs, going into the subway. Or, I remember my son mentioning a kid who was having trouble with a locker who ended up being locker next door to him and was actually had already come out as gay and was afraid about, being perhaps bullied and so forth. And sometimes we didn't do anything. But having like those routines in your family and in your, in your checking in with your kids before bed, a high and a low, or, the questions that you ask them to sort of keep promoting this kind of behavior. So obviously there's a history part, but I'm focusing more on the parenting and really getting that kind of upstander ethic into your household. Those are just a few things we did, but we've had psychologists come and talk to a lot of our supporters, and I always hear the number one thing is modeling, the soup kitchen and, helping out, in your community where there are areas of need, crossing borders, being proximate, to people that might not be like you. That's really, really important. Your kids are watching you. They're watching you.
Yes.
We have several questions that are related. What is the age range that you're targeting? How do you adjust the curriculum for different age ranges? And are children ever emotionally triggered by some of this difficult content, and how do you handle that?
Excellent questions. One, our work is our content and our approach from its inception. Facing History is always, along with scholars, we've engaged people that understand adolescent behavior and adolescent development and how young people show up in space. So we're always being informed about that, and not just the history and the literature. Our content is taught from 6th grade up. So it's age appropriately for 6th grade up. The rigor of it, some of the examples we use is not appropriate for elementary kids. And then that third question is really important. Yes, students do have an emotional response to this, obviously, but what we try to do, we are very, very intentional about this. Long before we, for example, start discussing Reconstruction, we start with questions of identity. We start with creating what we call brave space for critical dialogue. We actually give educators real tools for doing that. How do you set up a safe classroom environment that's socially and emotionally safe? And this is informed again by adolescent development, and there might be some psychologists on the phone, that when young people, and even us as adults even, when we're not social and emotionally safe, our frontal lobe actually shuts down. Without there's no learning going to happen when folks are not safe. They literally shut down. So we give teachers some very particular classroom strategies and practices to create safe space. And I'll end with this idea of we take students safely in these histories, but we also take them safely out. We don't want the bell to ring and the kids are talking about a lynching, right? So we're very careful about how to take students safely out of these moments as well.
How does Facing History help children navigate difficult conversations with their peers? In other words, what happens when myths are dispelled for children, but they have to address ignorance from other children?
Pam, you want to?
Yeah, I mean, actually, I was thinking so much of my conversation today with this alum who said, that her best friend has very different political views. And I think that what we try to model and what happens in the classroom is this respect for different views and different opinions. And when we look at particular documents, there are different approaches that students come to looking at any of these documents, even the ones, Steve, that you just saw. And it's about listening, and it's about respect, and it's then giving them the tools to sort of ask questions, to probe, and to listen. And you don't have to necessarily in the end agree, but the value of listening to multiple perspectives and multiple opinions is really, really important. So we try to get kids to, you know, be able to say to a friend, hey, that's not cool to call that kid a, you know, some epithet, and that's actually upstander work, and that's something that we really celebrate. And that takes courage, you know, for a young kid, for a young person to say to another peer, hey, don't tease that kid, or don't say that. So we try to give them the tools in the classroom discussions. You know, there's a lot of debate in facing history classrooms. It's respectful debate. There are uncomfortable moments, like Steve mentioned, but the teachers have created these contracts and a whole kind of rules and regulations of the road, if you will. But I do think that facing history students know how to listen, and then they know how to kind of lead by example, but also lead, you know, their friends. And in the end, it's okay to disagree, right? As long as people have had the facts, and that's the important part.
I was just having a conversation with my teenage son yesterday about a very appropriate response is agreeing to disagree. I like using that one in my own life as well. We have some related questions in terms of how, you know, are there online materials for adults, or is there a way to get educated as adults? How do non-history teachers get access? Are these materials shareable? So how does the adult population and non-history and English teachers get educated?
Sure. Well, should I start? Basically, you go onto our website. We have a lot of resources. We run public programs. This year, in fact, we have a series on race and justice. They're called Community Conversations. In fact, tomorrow night, we have one which we'll send out. I know, Reg, you're going to send out an email to everyone, with Jelani Cobb, who's a scholar and a writer, a terrific speaker, about a recent film from Frontline about whose vote counts. It aired just a few days ago. So we have that. And then Isabel Wilkerson will be our other one, which is tied to our benefits. So we have public programs. You can sign on our website. We also have current events newsletters that you can sign up for as well, and newsletters that come out. So, you know, we, for the most part, try to engage people. If you're locally interested, you know, please reach out to me, or even if you're from around the country, reach out to me. We do run like salons and, you know, house events, and, you know, get to spread the word so people can learn more about facing history. So that, I guess maybe that's a few places. We have put out some parent newsletters as well, all on our website.
And the current event it's called Facing Today, our current event page. Yep. You can find that an interesting place, you know, when things are happening in the world relating to these topics that we're discussing. If you just want to hear some blogging, some reflections that are similar to the conversation we're having tonight, that's nuanced, that's a good place to go to sort of get out of the vacuum of the polarized conversations that are happening in social media.
And please sign up on our social channels. And I know Reg is going to send out something as a follow-up. We have all these links in the follow-up, links to these different pieces that we've been referencing, but we have lots of social media followers, and we do post lots of readings and pieces for you to think about.
Couple questions on your biggest organizational challenges. What are your greatest barriers to growth in new cities? How do local politics play into whether or not you onboard?
What's our biggest barrier? Resources, money. You know, we're a nonprofit. We're actually about a $25 million nonprofit. You know, we're basically supported 95% by philanthropy. So we are, you know, one of the pieces we've been doing is we've been really in a moment of scale. Just even in the last 3 years, we've doubled the number of teachers that are using our program, which is fantastic. But you know, this costs money, and staff are valuable. One thing that we have done, though, which has been exciting in the scaling moment, and particularly in the online moment, I mean, we pivoted right to an online platform that we had been building and really investing in our infrastructure and technology the last 3 years. So more and more teachers, our web traffic went up like more than 3 times. This past summer, we trained over 13,000 teachers in all different forms of professional development. Those are numbers that are almost more than 3 times greater than previous years. So, but we're working on building out our new platform, and so that all that just takes resources. So we want to try to be there. I don't know, Steve, you want to talk to the other cities? You want to speak to? I would just say that other cities all over the country are reaching out to us. It's really great where we don't have offices, like South Bend, Indiana, places in North Carolina are starting to reach out to us now, which is really exciting. But we have a very small team, that used to travel around the country, obviously, but now we're doing it all online, which is great right now. As long as we have Zoom and we have some other online platforms, we're trying to meet their needs as best we can.
Yeah. I'll double down on resources is our biggest challenge. And also the idea that sometimes we have to overcome, and we do, the idea that facing history, this may be for sort of more liberal schools or communities or what have you, that this is just not true for us. We feel like that one of the ways that we should be, one great strategy for really stopping the spread of hatred and bigotry and racism is to go to places where students are isolated, right? So these are hate groups. They target young people that are isolated in these rural communities and don't feel connected to the world. They target these isolated kids and attract them to these ideas of hatred and bigotry. And so we are super committed to going to those communities and say facing history embraces young people everywhere and humanize their experience and want them to be a part of this dialogue about what does it mean to be human and what it means to be in a democracy. And once those communities hear that message, they too want facing history in ourselves. But we're constantly working for that to happen as well.
And Steve down in South, we have a huge new communities project down South. We're working with 7 or 8 Southern states. We're working in rural Virginia. And so we're working all over the country. So.
Well, listen, I'm gonna take it from here. I just want to say thank you all. Thank the 3 of you so much for engaging this conversation. This was really June 1st. I was thinking about this conversation. Sarah Marie, you were in my mind, and Bjorn Haynes was in my mind, saying I need to talk to Facing History. I need to make this happen. And just judging by the number of questions we've gotten and number of questions we're not going to be able to get to, there's a lot of interest. And so, as mentioned earlier, I will be sending out an email to everybody that includes a lot of information, a lot of links. It's easy to digest, but just so everyone, just please look through it. And if you agree with what this is, then walk the walk, support it, learn from it, join some of their conversations, take from the resources what you can, and at the very least, take these lessons home to the dinner table, to bedtime with your children, because that's what matters the most. And it's just, I'm so thankful that we have an organization like Facing History in ourselves that promotes this mission and is taking it on in such a massive way. And so I couldn't be more appreciative. And so just before we end it, I just want to remind everybody that these conversations, the 2 prior that I have done and this one, this is all about getting educated to act. And so these calls to action that I'm saying, this isn't just nice to have. This is like, what did you learn? What will be different in your life after hearing this? That is a question I think we all need to be asking ourselves and answering every single day, because I am not interested, and I don't think that anyone should be interested in the perpetual march towards some amorphous goal of racial equity. We need to be achieving it. Education is definitely step 1. So please, Facing History, keep up the good work. Sarah Marie, you're amazing. Thank you so much for joining and hosting this conversation. And anybody in the who's still left on out of the 44 attendees, you have my email address. Reach out to me if there is anything more that you want to know. Reach out to me if there's anything that another topic that you want to have covered. Reach out to me if you want to do a racial equity solutions conversation with your friends or your coworkers in your institutions. We can talk through how to do that. I'm looking to partner with as many people as I can to get people active. And so if you have an idea, you come to me and we'll make it happen. And again, the three of you, thank you all so much. Everyone for joining, thank you all so much. What a serious pleasure and honor it has been to serve in a panel with you all.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for having
Great
us.
experience. Thanks for having us.